Please have mercy.
The evidence is clear.
Not all churches in England preached salvation, some echoed with the cries of women no one ever saw again. The chapel in Hollowmere stood crooked against the wind, its spire tilting like a drunkard's hat. Ivy strangled its stone face, and rain seeped through its roof like tears from the heavens. But it was not the decay that made villagers cross themselves when they passed. It was what lay beneath. Agnes Wren had passed that chapel every morning since she could walk. At 17, she still paused at the threshold, not to pray but to listen. Some swore they heard moans at night, soft as breath against candlelight. Others claimed the roots of the yew trees out back grew in strange, twisted spirals, like hands reaching from beneath. Agnes never believed the tales. Her mind was too full of remedies, flowers, and tinctures. She had inherited her mother's mortar and pestle, and from Mistress Halley, the village herbalist, she learned to crush feverfew and whisper over honey when the air turned bitter. Her hands smelled always of thyme and soot. She was not a witch, only a girl with gentle hands and eyes too green for her own safety. The trouble began when Father Barrick's dog fell ill. The animal, old and speckled with tumors, had stopped eating. The priest, red-eyed and jittering with rage, had declared it a sign from God. He called for holy water. When that failed, Mistress Halley said quietly, "Let Agnes try." It was not defiance. It was desperation. The beast whimpered through the night. Agnes boiled sage and willow bark, ground it with flax oil, and spooned it gently between the animal's teeth. She sang softly as it lapped the mixture. By dawn, the dog lifted its head, sniffed her apron, and licked her wrist. Father Barrick smiled. But not with gratitude. He had yellow teeth that jutted like crooked stones, and when he looked at Agnes, his smile did not reach his eyes. "How clever you are," he said, voice like wet ash. "Too clever." 3 days later, Mistress Halley vanished. Her cottage was found empty, the fire still warm. Only her shawl lay folded on the bed. Agnes searched the nearby woods until dusk, calling her name. No one helped. By morning, the whispers had begun, half-wild things about spirits, charms, and girls who spoke to trees. Agnes did not sleep that night. Nor the next. On the third day, a knock came at her door. 3 parish guards stood in the rain, one holding a slip of parchment. The other held shackles. Agnes blinked at the iron. "For what?" she whispered. "For the preservation of your soul," the taller man muttered. "And ours." They dragged her through mud and candlelight, through the crooked door of the chapel. The pews were empty. The stained glass saints watched with unseeing eyes. Behind the altar, a section of floor creaked open, revealing a stairway spiraling into blackness. One of the guards lit a torch. Another muttered a prayer. The stairs groaned beneath their weight. Stone gave way to rot. The deeper they descended, the colder it became, until Agnes could see her breath curl before her like ghost smoke. When they reached the bottom, she blinked at the sight. It was not a room. It was a pit. A low chamber of moss-covered walls and iron rings. The air smelled of old blood and damp wood. Chains hung like vines. At the far end, 3 hooded figures sat on stone benches behind a raised platform. They wore black robes and masks of bleached wood, their mouths curved downward in eternal judgment. Father Barrick stood beside them. He removed his hood and stepped forward. "Agnes Wren," he said, voice calm, almost amused. "You stand accused of speaking charms over beasts, practicing unnatural healing, and consorting with the remnants of forbidden tongues." Agnes stared at him, stunned. "I only help your dog." He nodded. "Indeed. And he lives. Yet the Lord's will was not to be meddled with." Her voice cracked. "Mistress Halley taught me. She was no witch. She vanished, did she not?" His eyes gleamed. "The righteous often flee when light finds them." Agnes trembled. She tried to speak, but her voice caught. From her apron pocket, they pulled a small scrap of linen, her birthing charm. A prayer embroidered in Old Welsh, given to her by her mother. It had protected dozens of women during childbirth. "This," Father Barrick declared, holding it high, "is not the language of angels." The tribunal did not speak. They simply nodded. 2 guards seized her arms and dragged her to the center of the pit. The floor was damp. Bits of shattered bone crunched beneath her feet. She saw chains still rusted to the wall, and in one corner, a child's doll, half-burned, half-moldering. A woman's shawl. A braid of black hair. "Do you repent?" Barrick asked softly. Agnes clenched her jaw. "I have nothing to repent." His smile returned, wider now. "So be it." She waited for them to speak of burning. Of the pyre. But the judges were silent. Father Barrick leaned close, so near she could smell the rot beneath his breath. He whispered, "You won't burn, they have something older in mind for you." Then he stepped back. The judges tapped their staffs once. The stone beneath her creaked. A seam opened at her feet, a trapdoor she hadn't seen, covered in dust and straw. One guard yanked it open. From below rose a stench of rot and earth. Blackness gaped beneath. Agnes's heart thundered. She screamed as they pushed her toward it, but the sound was swallowed by the dark. The last thing she heard before the trap slammed shut was a voice, deep, hollow, not human, chanting her name in a tongue older than Welsh. And LAW&CRIME slept. They marked the doors of plague victims with red crosses, but in the prisons below, they erased names with knives. The air in London stank of rot and dread. Smoke curled from chimneys like black ribbons of mourning, and the bells never stopped tolling. Every morning, carts clattered through the streets, loaded with bodies. Some still twitched. Rats swarmed the gutters like a second tide, slipping through kitchens and cradles with equal ease. Eleanor Cates wrapped her shawl tighter as she walked through street aisles, trying to ignore the sounds, hacking coughs, broken wails, a child calling for its mother from behind boarded windows. She kept her eyes down, her hands gloved, her herbs hidden in a pouch under her apron. The birthing had gone wrong. The noblewoman bled before Eleanor had even been summoned. No potion could fix what had already slipped beyond breath. But men with powdered wigs and powdered egos did not mourn stillborn heirs kindly. They came for her at dusk. The constable did not knock. He struck her door with the butt of his cane and entered like he owned the silence. Behind him were 2 soldiers in black, not the king's colors, but something colder. Their gloves were stained, their eyes too calm. "You served the Montgrave house last night," the constable said. "I did," Eleanor answered, steady. The babe had already passed. "And yet you touched the lady with your charms." "I touched her hand as she screamed." "That'll do." They took her without struggle. She had delivered too many children in this city to believe justice favored women who bled with the people instead of bowing to them. She didn't ask where they were taking her. Only one place accepted women accused of witchery during plague times. The place where names were swallowed, not recorded. Bridewell Prison. Its gates moaned open like a beast reluctant to wake. The building had once been a palace, but its walls now wept mildew and iron. Inside, the air was thick with moans and mold. Rats lived like royalty. The jailer tossed Eleanor into a cell so narrow she could press both palms against its walls and feel warmth from the prisoner beyond. It was days before anyone spoke to her. Food came once. Water, twice. No explanations. No trial. Only darkness and whispers. Then, one night, as thunder rattled the stones, she felt a splinter shift beneath her bunk. She pressed her fingers under the wood. Something sharp scraped her skin. She pried loose a board. Beneath it lay stone, no, not stone. Words. Hundreds of them, carved with trembling hands and broken nails. Names. Each one gouged into the stone wall like a final scream. Susanna Wells. 1628. Marjorie Dane. 1634. Agnes Wren. 1646. The name stopped her heart. She ran her fingers over the carving, rough and deep. A name she had heard once, whispered by her grandmother in a hushed story, of a girl swallowed by the earth, a chapel, and a curse no one dared write down. Eleanor touched her own chest, suddenly chilled. Agnes Wren had vanished almost 20 years ago. Yet here she was, a scar in stone. The next morning, Eleanor spoke through the wall. "What is this place?" There was silence. Then, a voice, crackling and ancient. A grave that breathes. The woman beside her called herself Mistress Tab. She spoke like a relic, each word dry with history. I knew Hollowmere, she whispered. Survived it. Eleanor leaned closer. That place is real. Arenas for women who knew too much, the old woman said. Hidden under altars. Judged by masked cowards. But the ones they spared, they took us somewhere darker. Eleanor closed her eyes. You were there. Mistress Tab exhaled. They said I was mad. That my womb caused illness in babes. They took me below the chapel. But I did not die. I was taken. Taken where? There was a pause. To the physicians. It made no sense. But then again, nothing had since London started dying by the hour. Mistress Tab explained in fragments, her voice breaking with coughs. They wanted the blood of the accused. Said our bodies held resilience. Wanted to find what let some women survive the plague while others fell. So they cut us. Measured. Burned. Bled. Injected us with black tonics. I stopped counting the days when they sewed my eyelids open. Eleanor felt sick. She wanted to believe it was fever, but it was something colder. A horror blooming slow and wide in her gut. They still take women, she asked. Mistress Tab was silent. That night, the old woman began to cry. Not loudly, but like a child muffling sobs under a quilt. By dawn, she was silent again. When the jailer came, he didn't notice Eleanor's shaking hands. He only opened the cell beside hers and dragged out Mistress Tab's body. Her tongue had been cut out. Her fingers snapped. But her eyes were open, and they looked straight at Eleanor, wide, dry, and knowing. Eleanor wasn't given time to grieve. That evening, the footsteps came. But these were not the ironclad boots of guards. They were soft, padded. Precise. She looked through the bars and saw 3 men in long red robes descending the corridor. Their faces were covered in bird-beaked masks, the kind worn by plague doctors. But something was wrong. There was no cross sewn on their chests. Only a circle, stitched in black. One carried a lantern. Another held something that looked like a scroll, but unrolled it was a strip of flesh, covered in ink. The third carried no tools. Just stared at her through the beak. Eleanor backed against the wall. I've done nothing, she hissed. The one with the scroll spoke, voice filtered through cloth. You have lived. That is enough. They unlocked her door with a key carved from bone. She tried to fight, but they gripped her like stone. Dragged her from her cell, down a corridor she had never seen. Past doorways with scratch marks. Through a stairwell that curved tighter and tighter into the earth. The deeper they went, the more the air turned still, not cold, not hot, just dead. Torchlight flickered on the stone walls. And then she saw it. At the base of the spiral, a door. Old oak. Hinges black with age. And carved across the wood, in letters still wet with some tar-like ink, was a name. Hollowmere, 1647. The men with the scroll leaned close and whispered into her ear, as the door creaked open to welcome her into the dark. This is where the names go to vanish. They came across the sea not just with Bibles, but with the whispers of punishment perfected in England's forgotten pits. The sky above Salem was slate gray the morning they came for Susanna Wren. Rain hadn't touched the earth in weeks, yet the air hung thick with dampness, as if God himself held back breath. The village had grown paranoid, each cough a curse, each dead calf a divine sign. Superstition had roots deeper than oak, and fear grew from it like thorns. They said she had bewitched Widow Talbot's goats, that her glance turned milk sour, that she whispered in her sleep of women with no eyes. They said miscarriages followed her, like wolves to a wounded thing. She was 19. Her hands bore no rings, only calluses from soap and salve. She worked as a washerwoman for 3 households and had helped midwife 2 births in the last year, both boys. But when Mary Jenkins lost her child, pale and breathless in its mother's arms, the town looked for a scapegoat. And they found Susanna. She did not scream when they shackled her wrists. She did not beg as she was led to the cell beneath the meeting house. The wind carried the sound of bells, and for a moment, she thought of her grandmother, of a story told in hushed tones, not by her mother, but by a neighbor once drunk with grief. Agnes Wren. A name not spoken aloud in her family. Not since England. The cell smelled of wet wood and secrets. Its walls bore no markings, no light, only the memory of others who'd waited to be judged. Susanna sat for hours in silence, hands clasped as if prayer could unlock